Grab some popcorn, turn off the lights, and make sure your doors are locked. Because what you're about to hear is real, disturbing, and might be closer than you think. Welcome to Frozen Clues, where every case reveals the darkest corners of the human mind. Are you ready to dive into the mystery? Then let's begin. There's a moment in every family's life when everything changes forever. A before and after that divides existence into two completely different realities. For the Ramseys, that moment came at 5:45 a.m. on December 26, 1996. Patsy Ramsey walked down the stairs of her Boulder, Colorado mansion, expecting to find the remnants of a perfect Christmas night. Open presents scattered around the living room, the scent of cinnamon still in the air. Maybe a cup of coffee to start the day. Instead, she found 3 pages that would transform her family into the center of America's greatest criminal mystery. A Thea ransom note, handwritten, scattered across the steps of a staircase she had climbed up and down thousands of times. But that would never be the same again. Mr. Ramsey, the letter began with strange, almost theatrical formality. Listen carefully. We have your daughter. But here's something that must have chilled any mother's blood. Who were they? And how did they know exactly where to find paper, pen, and enough time to write a 3-page letter inside the victim's own home? This is the story of JonBenét Patricia Ramsey, a 6-year-old girl who should have been waking up to play with her Christmas presents, but instead became the center of an investigation that remains unsolved nearly 3 decades later. A case that not only took a child's life, but destroyed a family, divided a community, and exposed the deepest flaws in the American justice system. What really happened in that house in the early hours of December 26th? How did a perfect family become suspects in their own daughter's murder? And why, after millions of dollars spent, hundreds of suspects questioned, and decades of investigation, do we still not have an answer that makes sense? To understand what happened that fateful night, we first need to know who the Ramseys were, before they became the Ramseys of the country's most famous case. JonBenét Ramsey was the portrait of American success. CEO of a computer distribution company, he had built a billion-dollar empire starting from nothing. A respected businessman, experienced pilot, dedicated father. At 53, John seemed to have everything a man could want. Patsy Paul Ramsey was Miss West Virginia 1977. Intelligent, charismatic, she had traded the spotlight of beauty pageants for domestic life, but without losing the brilliance that had made her a champion. An ovarian cancer survivor, she saw each day as a gift, each moment with her children as a blessing. And then there was JonBenét. Even at 6 years old, she possessed something special. It wasn't just the beauty, though her blonde hair and blue eyes were striking. It was the presence, the way she commanded a stage, how she smiled for cameras, how she seemed born to be in the spotlight. She had already won titles like Little Miss Colorado, National Tiny Miss Beauty, and Colorado State All-Star Kids cover. Girl, to many, JonBenét represented the perfect American child. Beautiful, talented, full of life. But there was something the family kept secret, something only a few close people knew. John had just received a substantial bonus at work. Exactly $118,000. A number that, in a few hours, would gain a much more sinister meaning. The Ramsey Mansion at 755 15th Street was a symbol of prosperity in Boulder. 3 floors, 15 rooms, a labyrinthine basement with multiple rooms and corridors. It was the kind of house where you'd expect to find only happiness and security. A family fortress where the worst nightmares shouldn't be able to enter. But on the night of December 25th, 1996, something or someone managed to get in. The family had returned from a Christmas party at the White's house, close friends. John Bonet had fallen asleep in the car during the drive home. John carried her into the house and, according to the parents' testimony, put her directly to bed without waking her. Burke, the 9-year-old brother, also went to his room. The family was tired, satisfied after a night of celebration. It was a scene of domestic normalcy that millions of American families experienced that same night. Tired parents putting children to bed after a day of festivities. Nothing indicated that in a few hours, their lives would be shattered forever. But at 5:45 a.m. the next morning, Patsy walked down those stairs and found the impossible. A 3-page ransom note, handwritten, with handwriting that seemed almost familiar. Mr. Ramsey, the letter began. Listen carefully. We have your daughter. She is safe and unharmed, and if you want to see her alive again, you must follow our instructions. To the letter. Who writes a 3-page ransom note? Experienced criminals know that the more you write, the more evidence you leave behind. Each word is a risk, each sentence a potential clue. But this note was different. It was almost verbose, as if the author wanted to tell a story, create a character, stage a drama. And then came the demand that would make the world stop. If you contact the police or anyone, she will die. If you tell anyone about our little visit, she will die. The amount demanded by the supposed kidnappers? Exactly $118,000. The same amount, down to the last penny, of the bonus John had recently received. Information that only a handful of people knew. How would a stranger know such a specific financial detail? How would someone outside the family have access to such intimate information? Unless it wasn't really a stranger. Patsy Ramsey, holding that note with trembling hands, made a decision that would change everything. She did exactly what the note told her not to do. She called the police. 5:52 m. 7 minutes after finding the note, the emergency phone rang at Boulder's dispatch center. Patsy's voice, filled with panic, echoed through the line. Help! There's a ransom note, and our daughter is missing. But here's the first big question that haunts this case. Why would a desperate mother do exactly the opposite of what the supposed kidnappers demanded? Was it pure maternal desperation? Was it instinct to seek professional help? Or was there something more? Something she knew, but couldn't say? When the first police officers arrived at the Ramsey mansion, they found a scene that didn't seem typical of a kidnapping. John and Patsy were visibly shaken, but there was something in the atmosphere that didn't make sense. An inexplicable tension that went beyond the natural fear of parents whose child had been kidnapped. And then began the mistakes that would haunt the investigation forever. Instead of isolating the house as a crime scene, instead of keeping the family in quarantine until the kidnappers made contact, police allowed friends and family to come support the family. The supposed crime scene became a social gathering. People moved freely through the house, touching objects, contaminating potential evidence, destroying any chance at preserving crucial forensic clues. Hours passed slowly. Noon arrived, the time mentioned in the note for the kidnappers first. Contact. Nothing. The phone remained silent. No additional instructions. No proof that John Benet was alive. It was then that an investigator, perhaps out of desperation, perhaps intuition, suggested that John do a complete search of the house to see if anything was out of place. A seemingly innocent decision that would reveal the most shocking truth. John went down to the basement accompanied by Fleet White, a family friend. The Ramsey mansion's basement was a true maze. Laundry room, wine cellar, storage, workshop, multiple rooms connected by narrow, poorly lit corridors. But there was one specific door. A door that led to a small room in the back, used as a wine cellar. John headed directly to that door, as if he knew exactly where to look. He opened the door and immediately screamed, "Oh my God! Oh my God!" There, in a dark and cold room in the family's own basement, was John Benet Patricia Ramsey. Not in a remote hideout in the hands of unknown kidnappers, but right there, in their own house, all along. And at that moment, the kidnapping case transformed into something much more sinister, a homicide. And all the questions that would follow would be much more disturbing than any answers we could imagine. From the moment John Benet was found, every piece of evidence discovered seemed to deepen the mystery rather than clarify it. The forensic examination revealed she had been struck in the head with enough force to fracture her skull. But there were also signs she had been strangled with an improvised cord, a kind of garrote, made with rope and a paintbrush handle that belonged to the house itself. Here we have the first major dilemma. What was the cause of death? The blow to the head or the strangulation? And more importantly, why use two different methods? This suggests an inexperienced killer or someone trying to confuse the investigation. But the contradictory evidence didn't stop there. The famous broken window in the basement. John said he had broken it months earlier when he locked himself out of the house. But there were glass fragments on top of a suitcase positioned under the window, suggesting it had been broken recently. Was this the killer's entry point, or an attempt to stage a break-in? And then we have the question of the fiber found in the garrote knot fiber that was identical to the sweater Patsy wore the night before. How did that get there? Perhaps most disturbing, there was no conclusive evidence of forced entry into the house. No broken doors, no violated locks. How would a stranger have entered the Ramsey mansion, navigated the dark corridors to John Benet's room, committed the crime, written a 3-page note, and left without leaving traces? Unless it wasn't a stranger, as happens with all great mysteries. The lack of definitive answers gave rise to multiple theories, and each one is more disturbing than the last. The first theory is the phantom intruder, the Ramsey family's official version. An intruder entered the house, possibly someone who knew the family and knew about John's bonus. This person would have kidnapped John Benet, written the ransom note, but something went wrong and she ended up killed in the basement. But how to explain the lack of forensic evidence? How to justify such an elaborate ransom note? And why not take the victim out of the house? The second theory is the most controversial, but one that gained strength among investigators. Someone from the family itself was involved. Perhaps an accident that was covered up. Perhaps a moment of rage that got out of control. The ransom note would be a desperate attempt to divert police attention. The $118,000 inside information was used to make the story more credible. But here comes a third possibility that few dare mention. Burke Ramsey was 9 years old at the time of the crime. Just a child. But investigators noticed strange behaviors. He seemed disconnected, almost indifferent to what was happening. In an interview, when asked how he felt, he even smiled. Would it be possible for a 9-year-old child to be capable of such an act? And if so, would the parents have covered it up to protect their surviving son? Each theory has evidence that supports it, and evidence that contradicts it. It's like a puzzle where the pieces seem to belong to completely different pictures. If the crime itself was already disturbing, what happened afterwards transformed the tragedy into a true media circus. The press wasn't content to just report the facts. They dissected every aspect of the Ramseys' lives, every inconsistency in their statements, every conspiracy theory that arose. John and Patsy became simultaneously victims and suspects in the public eye. Their television appearances were analyzed, frame by frame. Body language experts dissected every gesture, every facial expression. Patsy, especially, became the target of public scrutiny. Her participation in the world of child beauty pageants was questioned. Was she living her dreams? Through her daughter? Did the pressure for perfection contribute to the tragedy? And Burke, the 9-year-old boy who lost his sister, grew up under the spotlight of public suspicion. How does this affect a child? How do you build a normal life when the whole world questions whether you're capable of murder? The media had transformed a family, destroyed by tragedy into characters in a public drama. And in that process, the search for truth was often eclipsed by the search for ratings. After decades of investigation, new developments continue to emerge, keeping the case in the public consciousness. In 2008, DNA tests found genetic material from an unknown man on John Benet's underwear. This led the district attorney to officially exonerate the Ramsey family, admitting they had been victims of a grave injustice. Recently, advances in DNA analysis technology have allowed investigators to examine evidence previously considered inconclusive. There is hope that modern forensic science can finally reveal the identity of the real culprit. But for the Ramseys, these vindications came too late. Patsy died in 2006 at age 49, a victim of ovarian cancer. She died without seeing her name, completely clear, without knowing the truth about what happened to her daughter. John, now over 80 years old, continues searching for answers. In recent interviews, he maintains that one day the truth will come to light. But will it come in time? So what have we learned from the John Benet Ramsey case? Perhaps the most important lesson isn't about who committed the crime, but about who we became while watching it. We saw how the thirst for answers can transform into bloodthirst, how the search for truth can be corrupted by the search for entertainment, how a family already destroyed by tragedy can be further destroyed by public judgment. John Benet Ramsey would be a 33-year-old woman today. Perhaps she would have children of her own. Perhaps she would have followed a completely different career from beauty pageants. Perhaps she would just be an ordinary person, living an ordinary life, far from the spotlight. But she remains frozen. In time, a 6-year-old girl with blonde hair and a radiant smile, whose tragic end became one of modern America's greatest mysteries. The truth is still out there, waiting to be discovered. And perhaps, just perhaps, justice will finally be done. But until then, the mystery of John Benet Ramsey continues to haunt us and make us question what we really know about those we love and about ourselves. But let's delve deeper into these theories, because each one reveals disturbing aspects, not just of the crime, but of human nature itself. The phantom intruder theory gained strength when investigators discovered that several people had access to the Ramsey house. Domestic workers, security company employees, neighbors who had spare keys. Boulder was a small, trusting community where many families left doors unlocked. Even more intriguing, days before Christmas, the Ramseys had attended a party where John casually mentioned the bonus he had received. Who else was at the party? Who could have overheard this seemingly innocent information? Investigators identified an employee from John's company who had been recently fired and knew details about the family's life. There was also a man who presented himself as a photographer and had asked to take pictures of John Benet at beauty pageants, but who was never completely identified. And then there's the most disturbing aspect. Evidence suggests the killer remained in the house for hours, ate food from the refrigerator, used materials found in the house itself to create the garrote, wrote a 3-page note using the Ramsey's paper and pen. What kind of person commits a crime and then sits down to have a snack and write a letter? This brings us to the second theory, which still divides experts today: the family involvement. Theory gained traction when investigators noticed inconsistencies in John and Patsy's statements. Their versions of the previous night's events and the following morning changed subtly with each interview. Patsy, for example, said she put John Benet to bed after the Christmas party, but John Benet was still wearing the same clothes from the previous day when she was found. Why wouldn't a mother change her daughter's clothes before putting her to bed? John said he checked all doors and windows before sleeping, but later admitted he probably had forgotten to lock some. These were small details, but they created doubts about the truthfulness of their statements. Patsy's behavior also intrigued investigators. In the emergency call, she seemed genuinely desperate, but witnesses reported that moments later, she was dressed and made up when police arrived. Would it be possible for someone in real shock to have the presence of mind to get ready? And there was the handwriting issue. Experts couldn't completely rule out the possibility that Patsy had written the ransom note. Although it wasn't a perfect match, there were enough similarities to raise suspicions. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect is the possibility that it all started as an accident. Imagine a sibling argument that got out of control, a child seriously injured, desperate parents trying to protect their surviving son. This would explain the elaborate ransom note. It wasn't written by an experienced criminal, but by panicked parents trying to create an alternative narrative. It would explain why the kidnapper knew intimate family details. It would explain why there was no real attempt to collect the ransom. And then we arrive at the most controversial theory of all: Burke's involvement. In 2016, 20 years after the crime, Burke Ramsey gave his first television interview. At 29 years old, he still seemed uncomfortable talking about his sister. He smiled at inappropriate moments. His answers were evasive, almost childish. But would it be fair to suspect a child who grew up under constant public scrutiny? Burke was only 9 years old when he lost his sister. He spent his adolescence and early adulthood being questioned, analyzed, judged. Investigators noted that on the night of the crime, Burke claimed to have slept through all the commotion. Neither his mother's scream upon finding the note, nor the police arrival, nor the chaos that followed, woke him up. For a 9-year-old child, this seemed unlikely. They also discovered that Burke had behavioral problems before. Episodes of anger, difficulties controlling impulses. Once, He had hit John Benet with a golf club during an argument over candy, an incident the family tried to minimize at the time. But even assuming that a 9-year-old child was capable of causing fatal injuries at a moment of rage, this wouldn't explain the garrote. Forensic examination suggested that the strangulation happened quite some time after the head blow. Would a child be capable of planning and executing something so elaborate? Or had Burke caused the initial injury, and the parents, finding her still alive but gravely injured, made the terrible decision to finish the job to protect their son? It's a possibility few dare to articulate, but one that would explain many of the case's inconsistencies. Each theory has its defenders and detractors. Each one would explain some aspects of the crime while leaving others unresolved. And perhaps that's the perverse genius of this mystery. There's no explanation that makes complete sense. What we know for certain is that on the morning of December 26, 1996, a family was intact. By the end of the day, that family was destroyed forever. John Benet was dead. Burke would grow up under suspicion. Patsy would be persecuted by the media until her death, and John would carry the weight of unanswered questions for the rest of his life. The John Benet Ramsey case isn't just about a crime. It's about how a tragedy can transform into entertainment, how the search for justice can become a witch hunt, how our obsession with mysteries can dehumanize the real people behind the headlines. And perhaps, in the end, that's the most disturbing truth of all, that our need to find a culprit can be stronger than our compassion for a family that lost a daughter and was never the same again. The media impact of the John Benet case was unprecedented. Within 48 hours, reporters from across the country were camping outside the Ramsey mansion. Helicopters flew over the property. Broadcast trucks blocked the streets of Boulder's quiet neighborhood. CNN interrupted its regular programming for live coverage. People magazine put John Benet on the cover. Television shows dedicated entire episodes to the case. And the more the media covered it, the more the public became obsessed. But why did this specific case capture the national imagination so intensely? There were other crimes against children happening in the country, some equally brutal, others equally mysterious. What made John Benet different? Perhaps it was the perfect combination of elements. A wealthy family in a small town, a beautiful child who participated in beauty pageants, a mystery with no clear solution. It was like a real-life soap opera, complete with suspects, plot twists, and conspiracy theories. The image of John Benet with makeup and elaborate dresses became iconic, but also controversial. Critics questioned whether it was appropriate for a 6-year-old child to participate in this type of competition. Child beauty pageants came under national scrutiny for the first time. Patsy Ramsey became a polarizing symbol. To some, she was a grieving mother unjustly persecuted. To others, she was a suspicious figure who had sexualized her young daughter. Her impeccable appearance in television interviews, always made up, always composed, was interpreted both as strength and as calculated coldness. Programs like 48 Hours produced multiple episodes about the case. Dateline made annual specials. Books were written, some defending the family, others accusing them. Documentaries were produced. Internet sites emerged dedicated exclusively to dissecting every aspect of the crime. And then came the copycats. Disturbed people began falsely confessing to the crime. In 2006, a teacher named John Mark Carr made international headlines by confessing to having killed John Benet. The media went into a frenzy, finally a resolution to the mystery. But when Carr's DNA was tested, there was no match. His confession was false. He had never been in Boulder at the time of the crime. He was just another disturbed person seeking his 15 minutes of fame through a family tragedy. The case also exposed flaws in the criminal justice system. The crime scene was compromised from the beginning. Evidence was contaminated. Boulder police, accustomed to minor crimes in a university town, weren't prepared for a high-visibility homicide investigation. Rivalries between police agencies hindered the investigation. The FBI offered help, but was partially rejected. The district attorney and police clashed over the direction of the investigation. Media leaks sabotaged investigative strategies. In 1999, a grand jury was convened to review evidence and decide if there was basis for criminal charges. After months of deliberation, the jury voted to indict the parents for criminal negligence resulting in death. But the district attorney refused to proceed with the charges, citing insufficient evidence. This detail only became public in 2013, adding another layer of mystery to the case. What did the grand jury know that the public didn't know? What evidence convinced them there was basis for charges? In 2008, 20 years after the investigation began, new DNA technology finally provided a concrete clue. Genetic material found on John Benet's underwear didn't match any family member. It was male DNA of unknown origin. Then District Attorney Mary Lacey wrote a formal letter of apology to the Ramsey family, admitting they had been unjustly suspected and persecuted. The Ramsey family is officially cleared of any suspicion in this crime, she declared. But even this vindication came too late for Patsy. She had died 2 years earlier, at age 49, a victim of ovarian cancer. Patsy spent the last 10 years of her life under public suspicion, defending her innocence, fighting against implicit and explicit accusations of having killed her own daughter. In her final interviews, Patsy insisted that one day the truth would come to light. "There's a killer out there," she would say, "and until he's caught, other children may be in danger." John Ramsey, now 80 years old, continues living with the weight of the unsolved mystery. In recent interviews, he expresses a mixture of hope and resignation. Hope that advances in forensic technology will finally identify the culprit. Resignation that perhaps he'll die without knowing who killed his daughter. Burke, for his part, tried to build a normal life away from the spotlight. He graduated in engineering, works in technology, avoids the media. In 2016, when he decided to give his first interview in 2 decades, he seemed like a man still haunted by childhood tragedy. The case remains officially open. Modern investigators have applied new techniques to the collected DNA, but without conclusive results. Theories about the killer include a serial predator operating in the region, a disgruntled employee from John's company, or even an obsessive stranger who had seen John Benet in beauty pageants. But perhaps the most important question isn't who killed John Benet Ramsey, but rather, what does this case reveal about us as society? It revealed our tendency to judge before knowing all the facts. It showed how the media can transform personal tragedy into public entertainment. It exposed our obsession with mysteries, even when that obsession causes real pain to real people. The John Benet case also raised questions about child beauty pageants that persist to this day. Is it appropriate to put young children in competitions that emphasize physical appearance? Do these events attract dangerous types of attention? Are we sexualizing children in the name of entertainment? 27 years later, JonBenet Ramsey remains eternally a 6-year-old child with blonde hair and a bright smile. She never had the chance to grow up, to discover who she really was beyond beauty pageants, to form her own opinions about the world. Her death stole not only her life, but also her family's peace, her community's innocence, and in a way, our own innocence about how dark human nature can be. The truth about what happened that Christmas night in 1996 is still out there, waiting to be discovered. Perhaps it's in a DNA database waiting for a match. Perhaps it's buried in evidence that hasn't been properly analyzed yet. Or perhaps it's in someone's conscience who hasn't yet had the courage to speak. Until that truth comes to light, the mystery of JonBenet Ramsey continues to haunt us, reminding us that not all endings are happy, not all mysteries are solved, and not all justice is served. But perhaps there's a final lesson in this story, that our humanity isn't measured by our ability to solve mysteries, but by our ability to show compassion to those who suffer, even when we don't fully understand their suffering. If you were intrigued by this story, leave your opinion in the comments. Which theory makes the most sense to you? Do you believe we'll ever discover the truth? And most importantly, what can we learn from this case about how we treat families going through public tragedies? Subscribe to the channel for more stories that explore the most fascinating and disturbing mysteries of our society. Because sometimes, the questions we ask are as important as the answers we seek. The truth may be hidden, but it never completely disappears. And as long as there are people willing to search for it, there's hope that justice, even if late, will finally be served. Until the next mystery.